started on a night I'd rather forget. I remember the darkness pressing against the walls of my small room, the muffled hum of Lagos traffic outside, and Say's muffled sobs from his room. My name is Aisha, and this is my story, a story I wish I didn't have to tell. That night, I had a nightmare so vivid it felt real. A shadowy figure loomed over me, whispering in a voice that didn't sound human. "Come back," it hissed, over and over. When I woke up, the voice still echoed in my mind. Sei burst into my room moments later, his face pale and wet with tears. "Mama, they're in my room," he cried. "They're watching me." I hugged him tight, trying to reassure him, but deep inside I felt it too, an invisible presence, cold and menacing. I'd heard whispers before, seen shadows that didn't belong, but I told myself it was nothing. Now I wasn't so sure. This was the turning point, the moment I began to question everything. 5 months earlier, I was a desperate woman. My life had been a string of struggles, working long hours as a secretary, raising my son alone, and drowning in debt. My best friend Bola came to me one day with a solution. "You need to meet Prophetess Mirabelle," she said, with a conviction that made me curious. "She's a miracle worker, Aisha. She changed my life." At the time, I didn't believe in miracles. But what did I have to lose? That Sunday, I found myself standing in front of the Sacred Cross Ministries, a gleaming white building that seemed out of place among the noisy chaos of Lagos. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. People sang with such fervor, it felt like the walls would crumble. When Prophetess Mirabelle entered, dressed in flowing white robes that shimmered unnaturally, the crowd erupted. She carried herself with an air of divinity, her every move calculated to inspire awe. When her eyes met mine, it was like she could see through me. "You," she called out, her voice commanding, "come forward." Trembling, I obeyed. As she placed her hand on my head, I felt something shift inside me. "You have been bound by chains of poverty," she declared, "but today God sets you free." The crowd cheered, and for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. Over the next few weeks, my life began to change. I got a promotion at work, my debts disappeared, and Sei's chronic cough vanished. I started attending every service and vigil, giving as much as I could. The prophetess had saved me, or so I thought. But then the whispers started. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable. Then Sei began waking up screaming about figures in his room. Bola dismissed my fears, insisting it was the devil trying to attack me because of my blessings. But the shadows felt real, and I couldn't ignore the dread that grew inside me. Then came the night I attended the midnight vigil. That was the night everything changed. I didn't want to attend the midnight vigil, but Prophetess Mirabelle had insisted. "This is a rare opportunity," she said, her voice firm yet soothing. "God's ultimate blessing awaits only the chosen." I hesitated, but Bola nudged me. "Aisha, do you want to miss this chance? You've seen how your life has changed already. Imagine what more you could gain." So I went. The vigil was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was held in a dimly lit hall, with only candles illuminating the space. The air was thick with an energy I couldn't name, a mix of fear and anticipation. Prophetess Mirabelle stood at the center, her eyes glowing in the candlelight as she chanted in a language I didn't understand. At first, the congregation joined in, their voices rising and falling like waves. Then it happened. From the shadows emerged a figure so tall and thin it barely looked human. Its glowing red eyes pierced through the dim light, and its skeletal fingers seemed to claw at the air. My heart raced, and I wanted to scream, but the room was eerily silent. Everyone around me dropped to their knees, bowing their heads and chanting. Everyone but me. The figure moved closer, its bony fingers reaching for my forehead. When it touched me, a searing pain shot through my entire body, and everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying outside the church, disoriented and cold. My head throbbed, and my body felt heavy. I didn't remember leaving the vigil, but the fear lingered. I stumbled home, hoping to put the night behind me. But the nightmares returned with a vengeance. Meanwhile, someone else was watching Prophetess Mirabelle. Kunle was an investigative journalist who had been following her rise for months. He had seen too many people like her self-proclaimed prophets who preyed on the desperate and the poor. Kunle had heard stories about the miracles at the Sacred Cross Ministries, but he was skeptical. How could someone amass such wealth and power so quickly without hiding something? Determined to uncover the truth, Kunle went undercover. He attended services, pretending to be a businessman seeking blessings. What he saw made his skin crawl. During one service, he noticed something strange. Prophetess Mirabelle's shadow didn't move like the rest of her. It twisted and stretched, as if it had a life of its own. Kunle's instinct screamed at him that something was wrong. Back in my home, things were unraveling. I heard whispers even in the daylight. Sei refused to sleep in his room, insisting the shadowy figures were still watching him. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers grew louder, calling my name. One day, I heard Prophetess Mirabelle's voice in my mind. "Return to me, Aisha," it said. "Your blessings depend on your loyalty." I froze. How could she speak to me without being there? Desperate for answers, I called Bola. "Something is wrong," I told her. "This isn't normal. I keep hearing her voice, even when I'm alone." Bola brushed it off. "You're just overthinking. Keep praying, Aisha. This is a test of your faith." But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Then Kunle found me. He knocked on my door one evening, holding a file of documents and a determined look in his eyes. "You don't know me," he said, "but I know what you're going through." I hesitated, unsure if I could trust him. "I've been investigating Prophetess Mirabelle," he continued. "She's not who she says she is. I think you're in danger." His words hit me like a slap. Danger? From her? But she's helped me. Kunle shook his head. "At what cost? Look around you. Your blessings came quickly, but so did the darkness. She's using something unnatural, and it's hurting you and your son." I wanted to argue, but he was right. The blessings had come, but so had the nightmares, the whispers, the fear. Kunle leaned closer. "If you want to stop this, you have to help me expose her." I wasn't sure I was brave enough, but for Sei's sake I knew I had no choice. Together we planned to confront Prophetess Mirabelle. Little did I know, the battle ahead would test every ounce of courage I had. Kunle had gathered enough evidence to make anyone question Prophetess Mirabelle's intentions, but exposing her was not going to be easy. "She has a stronghold on her followers," he explained as we sat in my tiny living room. "If we're going to do this, we need proof so undeniable that no one can argue against it." He showed me recordings of her rituals, strange, unholy ceremonies involving animal sacrifices and chanting in a demonic language. My stomach turned as I watched her shadow move unnaturally, twisting and stretching in ways that defied logic. "She's not just a fraud, Aisha," Kunle said gravely. "She's dangerous. This is more than exploitation, it's evil." I felt a chill run down my spine. For the first time, I questioned everything I had believed about Prophetess Mirabelle. "What can I do to help?" I asked. Kunle smiled, though the worry never left his eyes. "You're already helping by agreeing to stand with me. But we'll need more witnesses, people who've suffered under her influence. Can you think of anyone?" I thought of Bola, but I knew she was too devoted to Mirabelle to listen. Still, I agreed to try. Kunle and I spent the next few days gathering testimonies. He worked tirelessly, meeting with former church members who had been cast out after questioning Mirabelle's practices. Their stories were chilling. One woman spoke of how her husband had died mysteriously after refusing to give more money to the church. Another man described hearing voices telling him to harm himself after attending one of Mirabelle's midnight vigils. Each story painted a clearer picture of the darkness lurking behind her pristine white robes. Meanwhile, my own nightmares grew worse. Every night I saw the same skeletal figure from the vigil, its red eyes burning into mine. It whispered things I couldn't understand, but the fear it left behind was unmistakable. Sei's health began to deteriorate again. He became pale and listless, barely speaking. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The day of the confrontation came faster than I expected. Kunla and I had rallied a small group of former church members who were willing to stand with us. Armed with evidence and unwavering determination, we marched to the Sacred Cross Ministries during a packed Sunday service. The church was as grand as ever, filled with the fervent voices of the congregation. Prophetess Mirabelle stood at the altar, radiating confidence as she delivered her sermon. Kunla interrupted her mid-sentence. "Stop this charade, Mirabelle," he shouted, holding up his recordings. "You are no prophetess, you're a fraud and a danger to everyone here." The crowd gasped, turning to look at us. For a moment, Mirabelle seemed unfazed, but then Kunla played the recordings. The atmosphere shifted. Murmurs of doubt rippled through the congregation as they heard her chanting in that eerie, otherworldly language. "This is the woman you trust," Kunla continued. "She's been using dark powers to manipulate and destroy lives." Mirabelle's serene smile vanished. Her eyes darkened, and her voice boomed unnaturally as she spoke. "You dare to challenge me in the house of God?" Her shadow stretched across the room, growing larger and darker until it engulfed the altar. The congregation screamed and began to flee. Kunle and I stood our ground, clutching crosses and whispering prayers. "You think you can defeat me?" Mirabelle roared, her true form emerging. She transformed into a monstrous being of shadow and fire, her fiery eyes glaring at us with unholy rage. The air grew thick with heat and malice as Mirabelle's monstrous form towered over us. Kunle led the charge, reciting prayers while holding a Bible aloft. "Light will always defeat darkness," he shouted, his voice unwavering. Mirabelle laughed, a deep guttural sound that shook the walls. "You are mere mortals. Your faith is weak." But Kunle's faith wasn't weak, and neither was mine. I clutched a small cross Kunle had given me, praying fervently for strength. As Mirabelle lunged toward us, a blinding light filled the room. The skeletal figure from my nightmares appeared, but this time it seemed weaker. It writhed in the light, letting out an ear-piercing screech. Kunle and I continued to pray, the words flowing from our lips like a river. The light grew brighter, engulfing both Mirabelle and the shadowy creature. With one final scream, they both vanished, leaving behind nothing but silence. The Sacred Cross Ministries crumbled to ashes that day, leaving behind only memories and lessons. Kunle's expose went viral, warning others to be vigilant about false prophets. Many people came forward with their own stories, grateful to be free from Mirabelle's influence. As for me, I returned to my simple life, but I was forever changed. I learned the hard way that not every church is holy and not every pastor is of God. Sei slowly recovered, and our home was filled with peace once more. I still pray every day, but now my faith is grounded in truth, not blind devotion. And for that I am grateful. Moral lesson. In a world full of deceit, always seek the truth. Faith is sacred, but blind faith can lead to destruction. Choose your spiritual guides wisely.